This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Jill Newbronner and here are tonight's top stories from East Asia. China and ASEAN are poised to sign a free trade deal this year as US tariff threats loom. Top diplomat Wang Yi says negotiations are now complete. The military chiefs of the US, Japan and South Korea are set for a meeting on defense cooperation amid growing speculation that President Donald Trump will charge more for American troop presence. Taiwan shows off its new US-made tanks at the annual War Games, an exercise that leader William Lai says gives the islanders an added layer of security. Concerns over surging household debt prompting South Korea's central bank to keep its benchmark interest rate steady. The BOK maintains it is open to a cut to support the economy. Also tonight, South Koreans are cranking up the air conditioners to stave off a scorching heat wave, and that's straining the national power grid. Plus, all aboard, China puts on an exhibition showing off its latest railway developments, and attendees even get a chance to drive a train in a simulator. First, Southeast Asia has been a hotspot for US and China to shore up alliances amid an unpredictable economic landscape. Now, the two rivals are taking their diplomatic toolkit to the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Meeting in an effort to garner more support. China, the first one to make a move, agreed to take its partnership up a notch with a new trade deal.
同东盟各国一道，弘扬和平、合作、开放、包容的亚洲价值观，建设和平、安宁、繁荣、美丽、友好的共同家园，推动构建更为紧密的中国东盟命运共同体，在全球南方卓然壮大的历史大势中，加强亚洲的振兴。
And staying with China's relations, the Malaysian Foreign Minister Muhammad Hassan says Beijing will sign a treaty for a weapons-free zone in Southeast Asia. Separately, Kuala Lumpur also signed a civil nuclear cooperation memorandum of understanding with the US, paving the way for American businesses to invest more in nuclear programs. But the US president's tariffs continue to cast a shadow over discussions. Now, remember, it's only been a few days since 8 ASEAN members received letters from him, including summit host Malaysia, with a higher tariff rate. And many more meetings are planned ahead. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, as well as diplomats from India, the EU and Japan, are expected to participate in discussions in Kuala Lumpur. So let's get the very latest from our CNA's Melissa Goh. She is in Kuala Lumpur live for us. Mel, lots to talk about. But first, tell us about the discussions and the treaties that have been signed so far.
Well, indeed, lots of big wigs in town. Well, this morning, as you mentioned, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi may meet the ASEAN counterparts to reassure them of China's support for Southeast Asian region, standing in solidarity with the ASEAN member countries amid the onslaught of the US unilateral tariffs. This afternoon, the focus turned to the US as Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who's on his first visit to Southeast Asia, met ASEAN counterparts at the post-ministerial meeting. Now, he also called on Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, who's promised ASEAN to raise the issue of tariffs collectively with him. Now, this as member countries are scrambling to negotiate with the US to try cut a deal before the new higher tariff kicks in. Now, almost all the Southeast Asian countries are hit by high tariffs ranging from 20% to 40%. It's disruptive to businesses, affect growth and the people's livelihood. Now, Secretary Rubio is on the charm offensive here. According to those who were in the meeting, that's off limit to the media, in his remark, he wanted ASEAN, he said, to tap US vast expertise and know-how in nuclear technology, in particular in power generation, digital and green economy, in AI and so on. Set up the business in the US, he said, which can be done within weeks to correct the trade imbalances and avoid the high tariffs. Now, how this can be a win-win partnership for both ASEAN and US remains to be seen, but adding that ASEAN is a valuable partner to the US and it's important that this region remains open, free and secure. Now, while he did not meet Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi today, Secretary Rubio is reportedly meeting Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov during his time in Malaysia, but it's unclear when that will take place. Now, tomorrow at the East Asian Summit meeting and the ASEAN Regional Forum, he will be meeting his counterparts from Japan, Korea and China. So it will be another interesting day, Jill.
A lot to look forward to, but it is significant that both the US and China are at this very venue. Talk to us a bit about what you've seen in terms of both sides trying to convince ASEAN to, I don't know, ally with them.
Well, as the China-US rivalries, as Prime Minister Anwar said, it's no passing storm, with the shifting global order and the ever-changing geopolitical landscape. We are seeing ASEAN is treading carefully. Countries here are putting in extra efforts to avoid having to choose sides. I mean, the last thing ASEAN wants is to get caught in the crossfire. Now, China is ASEAN's largest trading partner for 4 consecutive years now, while US is the biggest buyer and investor, and often seen as an economic and defense counterweight to China, with its growing assertiveness, claiming almost all of South China Sea. Now, ASEAN, with Malaysia as the chair this year, is doubling down on efforts to maintain peace and stability in the region. One way is to encourage and push for early conclusion of the Code of Conduct on the South China Sea, which China Foreign Minister Wang Yi said that, it's just completed the 3rd reading, although the final draft is unclear. When will it get done? Jill?
All right, leave it there for now, but we will speak again tomorrow. Thank you so much. CNA's Melissa Go, live from Kuala Lumpur. Well, on the sidelines of the ASEAN meeting, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with his Japanese counterpart, Takeshi Iwaya, with both affirming the need to promote stable ties. Mr. Wang, in a readout, noted that both exchanges and interactions with Tokyo have grown, with bilateral relations showing a momentum of improvement and development. Mr. Iwaya told Mr. Wang that he hopes both sides can advance a strategic and mutually beneficial relationship, as he underscored the need to deepen communications. Now, for more insights on how the issue of trade and tariffs could impact economies across Asia, we'll be speaking with Adib Zalkapli, Managing Director of Viewfinder Global Affairs, and that is later this hour. Well, South Korea is hosting military chiefs from the US and Japan for defense talks. Seoul says the 3 leaders are holding bilateral meetings today. South Korea's Joint Chief of Staff, Chairman Kim Yong-soo, earlier welcomed his American and Japanese counterparts. US military chief Dan Kane's visit marks the first visit to the country by the highest-ranking US military officer since 2023. The chiefs are also scheduled to hold a trilateral meeting tomorrow to boost military cooperation. That meeting comes at a time when the US is putting pressure on its allies to hike defense spending to 5% of their GDP. CNA's Lim Yong-suk joining us now live from Seoul with more. Yong-suk, bilateral talks today. What was on the cards?
Well, yes, the bilateral meetings between South Korea and the United States and also South Korea and Japan were held here in Seoul. And the Defense Ministry put out a statement saying that the bilateral meetings in general, that the discussions focused on regional and Korean Peninsula security issues and ways to strengthen military cooperation. Now, there were no official, details given by the Defense Ministry. But here in Korea, as you said, all eyes are on the talks between Seoul and Washington, since it is being held after U.S. President Donald Trump again said that its Asian ally and here in South Korea should be paying more for its own military protection. Now, in response, South Korea has said that it would be following the terms previously agreed between the two sides on this defense cost sharing. Now, just before Mr. Trump won the presidential election in November last year, the two countries did come up with a deal, a 5-year deal on this cost sharing of keeping the 28,500 U.S. troops here in South Korea. And under that deal, South Korea was going to raise its contribution toward the upkeep of the U.S. troops by 8.3% to 1.47 billion U.S. dollars in the first year. Now, it is unsure if this issue did actually come up between Washington and Seoul meeting this afternoon, but many analysts are saying that it could likely have been discussed with both sides, giving their explanations on this issue. But definitely, there is no agreement expected during this round of meeting. But also, analysts saying that the talks are seen as an opportunity for both sides to better understand each other's position on this issue of this potential U.S. troop reduction. And also regarding South Korea and Japan meeting, the bilateral meeting, they were likely focused on how the two countries, can share information related to North Korea's nuclear weapons and missile program.
And tomorrow, Japan joins the talks. Does the agenda expand with the three of them tomorrow?
Well, yes, the meeting is scheduled to be held on Friday morning, and this is the first trilateral meeting under this new Lee Jae-myung administration. Now, the Defense Ministry says that the three countries will be reviewing the status of this trilateral security cooperation, and also they'll be discussing future developments and ways to maintain this momentum in this three-way defense collaboration. Now, they're also expected to discuss this Freedom Edge drills, which the local report here, Yonhap, says, citing unnamed sources, could be held as early as September. Now, these are the military drills to help the three countries work together, to respond in times when there are types of threats like the missile attacks, cyber attacks, or naval conflicts around this region, and also improve, coordination between the armies, navies, air forces, and also the cyber units. And so it's really, a way of making the three countries become stronger partners in keeping the region safe. Now, these drills, if they are held in September, they will be the third round of such military exercises between the three countries. The previous two were held last year in June and November in the waters south of Jeju. But apart from the Freedom Ridge, analysts here are saying that the top military officers from the United States and Japan could also be here to get an understanding of what the newly elected President Lee Jae-myung's policy on North Korea is, because it is very different from the previous government of Yoon Suk-yeol, because President Lee Jae-myung really wants this dialogue and engagement with North Korea and is not really eager to take any actions that could provoke the North Koreans.
All right, understood. Thank you so much, Lee Myung-suk, reporting live to us from Seoul. Now, the Chinese envoy to the United Nations has called on Houthis in Yemen to stop attacking commercial vessels in the Red Sea after two cargo ships were struck by the military group. China's deputy permanent representative to the United Nations, Geng Shuang, urged the Houthis to respect the navigation rights of commercial vessels from all nations and maintain safety of the waterways. In a statement, he called on both Israelis and Houthis to exercise calm and refrain from actions that escalate tensions. The Houthis attacked and sank a Liberian-flagged cargo ship yesterday, claiming it had ties to Israel. At least 3 crew members were killed. Only 6 of the 25 people on board have been rescued. The rebels say the attacks against cargo vessels symbolize their support for the Palestinians in Gaza. Coming up on East Asia Tonight, the world's biggest contract chip maker, TSMC, beats expectations for second quarter sales, brightening the outlook for AI spending. Plus, Samsung unveils thinner and lighter foldable phones in a bid to fend off competitors in the niche market segment. Time for the business news next with Roland Lim. And Roland, it's looking like the Bank of Korea seems to be tackling domestic matters in its latest policy decisions.
Indeed. I mean, surging household debt, rising housing prices, prompting the Bank of Korea to keep its benchmark rate unchanged as expected. Central Bank has been trying to balance between shielding South Korea's trade-reliant economy from Washington's trade tariffs and maintaining financial stability amid growing household debt as well as rising property prices. Although the Bank of Korea has emphasized it is committed to a rate-cutting stance to support economic growth, observers widely expect a rate cut soon. But Governor Ri Chang-yong is seemingly keeping his options open. Now, Mr. Ri said at a press conference that most board members were keen on a rate cut in the next 3 months, but two others pointed out that more time was needed to ensure financial stability. The BOK has already lowered its benchmark rate twice this year to support the economy after GDP shrank unexpectedly in the first quarter, following political turmoil at home. Its trade-reliant economy is also facing that threat of a 25% reciprocal tariff from the US starting August the 1st. Exports account for more than 40% of South Korea's GDP, and the Bank of Korea will likely have more clarity and time to decide its policy direction ahead of the 1st August deadline. Analysts are expecting at least one more rate cut this year. Japanese automakers have reportedly been slashing prices of their exports meant for the US market in a bid to stay competitive after being hit with 25% tariffs. Last month, the export price index for vehicles shipped to North America plunged more than 19% from a year earlier. That's the biggest drop in about a decade, according to the Bank of Japan's Corporate Goods Price Report. Sales grew 11.4% from the same period last year, driven by exports and demand for Apologies for that. Now, China's new vehicle sales grew 11.4% from the same period last year, driven by exports and demand for electric vehicles. The China Association of Automobile Manufacturers said that sales amounted to 15.65 million units in the first 6 months of 2025. Now, excluding exports, domestic sales grew 11.7% to more than 12 million units. Sales of new energy vehicles, including all-electric and hybrid models, jumped 40%, offsetting the decline in internal combustion engine cars. The sector has significantly grown as many switch to NEVs amid trade-in subsidies and aggressive price cuts by car makers competing for market share. Chinese brands made up nearly 70% of the passenger vehicle market in June. But the industry is expected to face headwinds in the second half amid rising concerns of a prolonged price war and its impact on the automotive supply chain. The world's largest contract chip maker has reported better than expected revenue in the second quarter, thanks to surging interest in artificial intelligence applications. TSMC sales for the April to June quarter rose about 40% on year to reach $32 billion. Now, that beat market forecasts for about $31.7 billion and came in higher than the company's guidance of between $28.4 and $92.2 billion. Its full second quarter earnings report will be released on July 17th. Now, TSMC sales have been surging in recent months as companies worldwide stock up on chips following US President Trump's global tariff blitz. Now, Taiwan has yet to receive a letter on the tariff that it would face from the US. The Taiwanese team is currently negotiating in Washington. Now, TSMC chairman and chief executive C.C. Wei recently said that businesses may be affected if US levies force prices higher, but added that sales would be, quote, still very good. The chipmaker's robust second quarter revenue also helping to lift expectations of an AI spending boom. Doubts over the tech firm's hefty spending into artificial intelligence equipment had surfaced following the release of China's DeepSeek's relatively low-cost AI model. But investors are seemingly piling back into AI-linked companies, with Nvidia becoming the first company in history to reach a $4 trillion valuation this week. The rise of artificial intelligence and its consequential demand for processing power has been driving the resurgence of nuclear power. It's also being viewed as an alternative and sustainable source of power. DBS predicts a renaissance in this particular energy as the world grapples with rising concern over energy security. Daryl Ho, Senior Investment Strategist of DBS, elaborates.
There was a lot of news, pretty tragic, around the Texas floods, as well as extreme weather patterns in Europe. And so I think the conversation has to go back towards sustainability, right? And greenhouse gas emissions has been a contributing factor to the patterns that we're seeing today. And so if the world is going to move towards a time where energy demand is going to rise because of AI, because of data centers, you need a source of energy that would produce that power without leveraging costs to the environment. And I think nuclear has to be part of that conversation in the alternatives that we are discussing now in order to progress towards a future that we can provide that power cleanly and sustainably. If this thematic has legs, we think that this could go for it's a multi-decade trend. And so if you were participating in the entire value chain, I would say that you would tend to benefit. You could go all the way from upstream to downstream. So, for example, uranium and uranium miners on the upstream, you have general ETF expressions of this theme. And by our estimates, we think that there's 100 million pounds per year deficit in supply, all the way to the year 2040, which means around a 20 to 30% undersupplied market for the next 10 to 15 years. And that's quite a strong tailwind, right? You move down the value chain and you talk about power producers. And you see in the news, just recently in the last months, Meta and Microsoft have all signed 20-year contracts with nuclear power production, right? And so I think this represents, more predictable cash flows because these big tech companies realize that if they want to have power contracts for the long term, nuclear energy is a very sustainable, a very strong, alternative that features in the discussion.
Samsung Electronics has unveiled its thinner, lighter new foldable phones at its Galaxy Unpacked event. It's South Korean tech giant's newest bid to fend off Chinese competitors in the still niche and premium segment. Samsung's latest generation of Galaxy Z series smartphones equipped with an upgraded camera and AI capabilities. This comes as the company is losing market share to Chinese brands like Huawei and Honor. Samsung is hopeful the foldable phones will boost its chances of becoming a leader in AI-powered smartphones. Its president and chief operating officer says the business aims to lead the AI smartphone industry by enhancing cooperation with external partners like Google. A Chinese industry body has warned investors to be vigilant against illegal fundraising risks involving stablecoins. The Beijing Internet Finance Association has cautioned that some institutions and individuals have been luring investors into crypto-related schemes that promise high returns under the guise of financial innovation. China banned crypto trading in 2021 due to concerns over financial stability. The association's warning comes amid a market frenzy over cryptocurrencies and other digital assets. An index tracking stablecoin concept stocks in China has surged 88% over the past 3 months, reflecting surging demand. Chinese tech giants JD.com and Ant Group have said that they would apply to issue stablecoins in Hong Kong. A stablecoin legislation is set to take effect in the territory on August the 1st as part of Hong Kong's push to become a digital asset hub. And that'll do it for business. Jill.
Good. Thank you so much, Roland. Now, coming up on East Asia Tonight, ASEAN members among those reeling from the latest salvo of tariff threats by US President Donald Trump. Can countries protect their economies from possible turmoil? We get insights when we speak with an expert in just a moment. Hello again, you're with East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. South Korea is hosting military chiefs from the US and Japan for defense talks. They're scheduled to hold a trilateral meeting tomorrow to boost military cooperation. Taiwan has showcased the firepower of its first US-sourced tanks as part of its annual Han Kuang military drills. The Abrams tanks are among the first 38 delivered in December, 70 more due in batches over the next year. And China and ASEAN are poised to sign a free trade deal this year, with Chinese top diplomat Wang Yi saying negotiations are now complete. This comes as US President Trump's threat of tariffs casts a shadow over the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Meeting, with 8 members receiving letters pointing to higher levies if no deal is struck by the 1st of August. So that's where we want to start. We want to start with more on the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Meeting. And we have Adib Zalkapli. He is the Managing Director at Viewfinder Global Affairs. He's joining us live from Singapore. Adib, thanks for joining us. Now, the elephant in the room was always going to be Vietnam and the tariff deal that it struck with the US last week. Now, its tariff suggests that it's been slashed by more than 20% in exchange for many export goodies from the US. So what then is the impact on ASEAN from Vietnam's so-called every man for himself deal?
Yeah, I think it's important not to look at the numbers this way. It is not a competition among Southeast Asian countries on who gets the lower tariffs. Southeast Asia is so interconnected in trade that getting a lower tariff, that while a neighboring country gets a higher tariff, is not something to be celebrated. The region is intertwined. It's a major manufacturing hubs that the reciprocal tariffs will affect all countries negatively. And most importantly, the fundamental principle behind reciprocal tariff is wrong. And in that aspect, ASEAN has shown that they are united in opposing the principle of reciprocal tariffs.
Well, that's interesting because recently you also mentioned that the deal with Vietnam also sets the tone for any kind of unity in ASEAN being undercut.
Yeah. So ASEAN itself as an organization, as you know, cannot negotiate on behalf of the individual member states. But ASEAN projection of ASEAN unity is important to send a message to the US that although countries are negotiating individually, they are united in opposing the Liberation Day tariffs. And one lesson we can learn from the Vietnam deal is that despite giving in all the concessions, they are still slapped with the relatively high tariff of 20%. It's not low tariff, right? It's 20% is high.
Okay, so we've always known that Trump likes bilateral interactions and deals. Anwar Ibrahim yesterday was calling for more intra-ASEAN trade and regional integration. Realistically, what can ASEAN achieve in this area if they do, in fact, pull together with a united front, while as well protecting their individual economies?
Yeah, so this is actually a rare opportunity for ASEAN to show its value as an organization, because I think over the last 10, 15 years, I think there's been a lot of questions on ASEAN unity, whether ASEAN can make difficult decisions in dealing with crisis, especially when facing major powers making decisions like the reciprocal tariffs, for example. But because of the reciprocal tariffs, it presents existential threats to individual ASEAN member states. So this is, I think, an opportunity in a way for ASEAN member states, to speed up its integration, trade more with each other. But it's not a straightforward process. It's going to be painful in the short term. The US is still an important economy, an important trading partner. So in the short term, it will be very painful, but this should mark the start of greater integration among ASEAN countries and how the country should move forward with diminish US role in international trade.
Well, we shall see. I want to get your comments on US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who was at the Foreign Ministers Meeting and today said Washington is committed to its partnership in the Asia-Pacific region, despite Washington's looming threats of those tariffs. Now, he said that the region remains a focal point of US foreign policy. What's your understanding of that comment, and how would that look on the ground?
Yeah, so this is not the first time a senior US member of administration has said the same thing. Recently, we had Defense Secretary said almost the same thing, sending the same message. But at the same time, when you have this counterproductive reciprocal tariff that make trade difficult, that will eventually affect the South Asian population, those messages will be ignored, be forgotten, and most people will remember how difficult it is to trade with the US rather than these nice speeches given by members of the administration.
Well, I guess that also brings up the question of China, because the US is reaching out to say, there are other areas that they are committed to ASEAN on. But China is also pretty much in the spotlight because they are rerouting exports through many Southeast Asian countries to avoid those US tariffs. So I'm wondering, in this new landscape, how is China playing it? Where does it leave China in terms of their concerns and next steps?
Well, I think China's strategy has always been, since the tariff rate has reached the level that is almost impossible to trade, is to ignore further escalation. And of course, as you know, there's been low-level talks, official-level talks to de-escalate the situation. But the core issue that the Trump administration is trying to address is cracking down on illegal transshipment. So there is a strong case for cracking down on illegal transshipment or country of origin fraud. These practices violate local and international laws, but the efforts must be carefully calibrated, to avoid legitimate trade flows. And they must be distinguished between the fraudulent activities and legitimate trade flows, value adding among countries. Is an essential part of manufacturing and supply chains across Southeast Asia. But if the Trump's administration efforts lead to disruption to legitimate trade flows, then I think China's position in this in Southeast Asia will be strengthened further.
Oh, so you think it would be strengthened because China is calling for a prioritizing of ASEAN in its diplomacy. But, we still have difficulties in the relationship between China and ASEAN. What do you think these relations would look like post-tariffs? As you said, optimistic?
Yes, I think in the short to medium term, it looks very positive. China is not only saying the right things, but also doing the right things. The latest announcement, the last one day, is unrelated to trade, but they're sending a positive message on South Asia nuclear weapon free zone, for example. That was positively received by ASEAN member states, and then with other measures in improving people-to-people interactions like visa-free travels and so on. So that creating a pathway for a more positive relationship with ASEAN. Of course, there are other issues. There are issues like overlapping maritime claims, but those issues, I think, can be dealt with separately. The immediate concern of people in South Asia now is, to continue to trade and to defend this established global trading order.
Understand, and thank you so much, Adib Zalkapli. He is the Managing Director at Viewfinder Global Affairs, speaking to us from Singapore. So on the sidelines of the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Meeting, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio this hour meeting with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. The war in Ukraine is likely among the topics on the agenda. The Kremlin today said it still wants to achieve its goals in Ukraine through peaceful means. Moscow this week launched its largest missile and drone attack against Kyiv in more than 3 years of the war. Semiconductors are the Philippines' top export, a cornerstone of its services-driven economy. The Biden administration previously signaled plans to deepen preferential investment in that sector. But will President Trump's tariff schemes stall that momentum? CNA's Buena Bernal finds out.
Semiconductor chips powering today's tech innovations, from smartphones to electric vehicles and even advanced aerospace and defense systems. No wonder the world's most tech-savvy nations are leading the charge. But somewhere in the global supply chain is the Philippines, a key contributor providing the precision and people power the industry needs.
A Philippine facility like this assembles, tests, and packages semiconductor chips for a wide range of brands from the United States, Europe, China, and other Asian countries, employing hundreds of Filipinos for their technical skills.
This company partners with local colleges to train future engineers. Fastech Synergy Philippines Managing Director John Mateo admits, while global competitors may have deeper pockets for equipment, the Filipino workforce brings something invaluable to the table.
Which is stickier, equipment or the talent? We think it's the talent. This product that they do, they know that this being utilized a communication tower or a specialized machine, or even in a specialized radar that seeks to find extraterrestrial species in the space.
Once exported, these processed semiconductor components are labeled Made in the Philippines, contributing to the country's standing as the 9th largest chip exporter in the world.
We do not put our name, we do not put our reputation on a certain product or service that we cannot really vouch on.
Despite semiconductors being the Philippines' largest single export product, with a projected growth of 10 to 15% from 2024 to 2027, the country still relies on imported raw materials. But more multinationals are setting up shop here. They often bring suppliers with them, slowly building a more complete local ecosystem. Economist John Paul Rivera says government support is crucial, particularly through targeted tax breaks.
The incentives would have to be well thought of and would have to be targeted to a particular segment of the semiconductor industry where productivity and competitiveness can be maximized, because there will always be a trade-off.
While the Philippines is a major hub for assembly, testing, and packaging chips, it still doesn't produce semiconductor wafers, the critical base of all chips. Taiwan has a near monopoly of producing these high-value base parts. Industry leader Dan La Chica is pushing for a modest wafer lab in the Philippines as a stepping stone. He says the pending U.S. tariff scheme could also benefit the Philippines, given a relatively low rate compared to regional neighbors.
We've seen a number of inquiries exploring the possibility of either setting up in the Philippines or having an alternative site in the Philippines just because of the tariff. If we demonstrate that we can do this modest wafer lab with the trained manpower, with the materials, with the ecosystem, then that would be a proof of concept that we can do it and hopefully be able to attract a commercial wafer fab at some point in the future.
Experts say the Philippine economy, anchored by strong domestic consumption, is relatively shielded from global trade shocks. The semiconductor sector in the country employs more than 360,000 workers and provides indirect employment to over 3 million workers. Buena Bernal, CNA, Kabuya in the Philippines.
China is grappling with widespread flooding as torrential rains continue to batter parts of the country. As Tropical Storm Danas affects China's coastal regions, monsoon rains drenched areas inland, causing flash floods and landslides. In Chongqing, severe rainstorms and strong winds uprooted trees and disrupted traffic, prompting a large-scale emergency response. Authorities have urged residents in affected areas to stay indoors. In Sichuan, 6,000 people were evacuated after 14 hours of rain. Meanwhile, more than 300 people were relocated after a flash flood near Tibet when a river burst its banks. The flood on the China-Nepal border has left at least 9 dead and at least another 19 missing. Power demand in South Korea could hit a new record this summer. Many are trying to keep cool as temperatures surge to all-time highs in parts of the country. Seoul recorded its hottest day in more than 100 years earlier this week, after midday temperatures soared to more than 37 degrees Celsius. The mercury even climbed to above 40 in the nearby cities of Gwangmyeong and Paju. Officials warn the heat wave is expected to continue into August. The country's industry ministry says it has secured additional power reserves to respond to the soaring electricity demand, and that's expected to reach 97.8 gigawatts. So to come on East Asia tonight, Taiwan showcases the firepower of its US-acquired tanks for the first time in its largest ever military drills. And Ukraine detains 2 Chinese nationals on suspicion of spying on its missile program. Taiwan has showcased the firepower of the first US-sourced tanks, its first US-sourced tanks, as part of its annual Han Kuang military drills. Spectators were treated to the sight of 4 US Abrams tanks in action as they fired at moving and static targets. They are among the first 38 delivered in December, with 70 more due in batches over the next year. Officials say the US Abrams tanks have yet to be fully commissioned, and the test firing was not a formal part of the Han Kuang drills. After observing the live firing, President William Lai said the Indo-Pacific region will be more peaceful and stable once Taiwan's safety is secured. The 10-day Han Kuang exercises are Taiwan's biggest. Senior military officials say the comprehensive drills are intended to show that Taiwan is determined to defend itself against any Chinese attack or invasion. Civil defence also a key focus in the Han Kuang drills this year. A local supermarket chain conducted evacuation exercises at 3 different stores across the island. When the air raid siren sounded, shoppers were escorted to the basement. There, they were taught how to protect themselves in the event of an attack, while shop employees practiced first aid procedures.
It's not just about the government's efforts. It's also about the civil society. Most of the Taiwanese people, I think people all have the understanding that in the current circumstances, especially regarding all these different threats or different challenges or risks we face, I think we need to be more prepared in any kind of situation.
Now, Ukraine said it has detained a Chinese father and son for allegedly spying on its Neptune anti-ship missile program. China, responding to the news, says it is still in the process of verifying the case. The Foreign Ministry said if Chinese nationals are involved, Beijing will safeguard their legitimate rights and interests. Ukrainian counterintelligence officials on Wednesday said the son was a 24-year-old student in Kyiv and the father lived in China but had travelled to Ukraine to coordinate his son's spying activities. The 2 are accused of trying to smuggle documents on the Neptune missile system to China. Ukraine, speaking with Reuters, said the 2 are the first Chinese nationals arrested for spying since its war with Russia began. Kyiv's Neptune missile came into prominence in the early days of the conflict. It was used to destroy the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet and has been launched at Russian oil terminals. Ukraine has repeatedly accused China of assisting Russia in the conflict, a claim that Beijing has dismissed. China's top diplomat Wang Yi, in his recent visit to the EU, reportedly told officials that Beijing did not want to see Russia losing, and that may cause the US to focus its entire attention on his country. He also insisted then that China was not supporting Russia in any way. South Korea's ousted leader Yoon Suk-yeol, who's now held in a solitary jail cell, has been summoned for questioning tomorrow over his failed martial law bid last year that plunged the country into political chaos. Yoon is set to appear at Special Counsel Cho Yun-suk's official office tomorrow at 2 p.m. local time. It will be the first time the former president is questioned following his arrest earlier today. A Seoul court earlier approved a warrant seeking that was sought by Mr. Cho's team, and that's tasked with investigating Yoon's martial law bid. The former president is now held at a detention center about 20 kilometers south of the capital. The special counsel had filed for the warrant over 5 key charges against Yoon. They accused the ex-president of violating the rights of cabinet members by calling up just a few to a meeting held shortly after he declared martial law. He is also accused of various falsehoods and taking action to block his own detention. Yoon's lawyers had rejected the allegations against him, saying the detention warrant was unreasonable and that the investigation lacked evidence. Now let's take a look at some headlines from media outlets in East Asia. NHK reports that Japanese officials plan to revise the system for converting driver's licenses obtained overseas to Japanese ones. This comes after Tokyo lawmakers expressed concern that foreigners may be driving on Japanese roads without fully understanding the nation's traffic rules. The Korea Herald, citing a Labour study, says that more young people, unmarried as well South Koreans living with their parents, have been expressing a weaker desire to work over the past decade. The report also notes that the share of younger people engaged in childcare over the last 10 years has dropped sharply by 13%. China Daily reports that a team of Chinese geologists created a Mars soil simulant that comes very close to replicating the properties of Martian land. This scientific breakthrough could be crucial for future explorations of the Red Planet, including China's ambitious plan to collect samples from Mars for study on Earth. The Chinese scientists, in findings published on the prestigious Nature journal, have shed more light on the evolutionary history of the moon. They used samples collected from the lunar far side during the 2024 Chang'e 6 mission for study, and that's a region that's not visible from the Earth's perspective. Researchers analyzing the magnetic field found evidence that lunar volcanic activity at the area persisted for some 1.4 billion years, but came to a stop some 2.8 billion years ago. Samples also showed that the water content in the lunar far side mantle, that is the region between its crust and the core, is much lower than that found at the near side. The theory is that a giant asteroid striking the moon billions of years ago could have led to the significant difference in water distribution. Now, China's exploration of Earth's natural satellite is part of its ambitious plan of eventually building a habitable base on the moon. Now, a railway exhibition showcasing China's cutting-edge developments alongside highlights of companies from 13 other countries and regions has come to a close today in Beijing. One of the standout displays at the event is a model of the CR450. That's a prototype bullet train that was unveiled last year. It runs on regular high-speed railway tracks and could reach test speeds of 450 kilometers per hour, but will be operating at a maximum of 400 kilometers per hour in the near future.
除了速度高之外呢，车内的舒适度也是更好了。首次采用了转弯架包覆结构，使它的阻力更低，整车的减阻达到20%以上。它也降低了气动噪声，也使车内更加舒适。
A train simulator also popular with attendees, with long queues forming for a chance to virtually operate the Fuxing train, one that can reach speeds of up to 350 kilometers per hour in real life. Now, China has the fastest growing high-speed rail network in the world. It is hinging on its expertise in its field to expand its connectivity with other countries and to help push its Belt and Road Initiative forward. That brings you to the end of East Asia Tonight this Thursday. But don't forget headlines anytime, CNA.Asia, Facebook and YouTube as well. Bye-bye.